Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Annmarie Hylton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people and the planet. For December, we're focused on identity violence. Every day, people's lives are defined and sometimes destroyed because of who they are, where they come from, or what they believe. We have been living it and experiencing it daily in the media, when our differences are turned into divisions. In today's conversation, we will unpack how identity-based conflict takes root, why it persists, what it takes to build societies where diversity isn't a trigger for violence, but a foundation for strength. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest, Jai-Ayla Sutherland, who is a program manager and officer of mass violence and atrocities of the Stanley Center for Peace and Security, where she supports efforts to build resilience in the worst kinds of violence by working with representatives from government, civil society, and the private sector to develop networks and promote evidence-based prevention strategies. She's worked in North America, South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and has experience conducting research on the roots of violence and conflict in Africa and the Middle East, and analyzing structural needs and policy approaches to preventing mass atrocities. She has a master's in international security from the University of Denver, along with a degree in international relations from the University of Southern California. Let's get into the interview. For more than 65 years, the Stanley Center for Peace and Security has brought together members of the global community to exchange ideas, foster innovation, and take collective action. The Stanley Center drives policy in 3 issue areas: mitigating climate change, avoiding the use of nuclear weapons, and preventing mass violence and atrocities. Today, I have the pleasure of diving into our discussion with Jai-Ayla Sutherland, who has dedicated her professional life to helping humanity. Welcome, Jai-Ayla.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited about this conversation because I think it is absolutely timely in the way the world is shaping out these days and what we're facing on not only a local level in the United States, but globally. But before we dive into all the ins and outs of how we're going to get through that, I always like to know a little bit about the person that I'm interviewing and understand who they are and how their heart developed in life. So what would you say drove you to get into this career space?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, I'm from Wyoming. I was born and raised in Wyoming, and I actually live in Wyoming now. But I think because, relatively speaking, Wyoming is very rural. It's not super diverse. And I think a lot of people will maybe lovingly say Wyoming is always about 10 to 20 years behind the curve. I think I just had a lot of curiosity about the world. And so when I had the opportunity to go away for school, I actually got really interested in international relations just generally and really wanted to extend my horizons and see more of the world, understand more of the world, meet people who are different from myself. And I think that coupled with a core value of equality, belief in humanity, belief in goodness, and I guess the two of those really kind of came together, and here I am, 10 years with the Stanley Center, and focused on believing that we can do better as groups of people, that peace is very much possible, and peace is actually around us all the time, and so it's worth working on this and shedding light on ways that we can continue to bring more peace and justice to the world.
Wow, I love that you've brought in something I didn't think of, but I think it's important that you said peace is around us all the time. And
Hmm.
that's something I think people are not feeling. But it's important for people to not forget that because unfortunately, we lived in a world that is so digitally connected, and there's so much news
Hmm.
coming to you every single moment of this horrible thing is happening and this horrible thing is happening that internally a lot of people, of course, are feeling anxiety, nervous, scared, a bunch of different things. And so that is a good thing to say that, and it's a good reminder that peace is always around us. It's just that something we have to choose.
Absolutely. And it's not to diminish the very reality of that stress and the violence and oppression and marginalization that so many people feel. It was not in any way to diminish or overlook that. But I agree that when people feel disheartened or hopeless or scared, there are always examples that we can look to of where peace is possible and peace is happening. And that actually connects to this work because we were really intentional in pulling together not just an assessment of the problems, but a deep listen analysis of the solutions that exist here and now, and what we can learn to bring more of those to bear for more people in an inclusive and just way.
Now, there's of course so many different segments that you could have taken with your career when it comes to international relations.
Mhm.
I guess what initially drove you to focus on identity based violence and how it connects to, I guess, everything.
I can't necessarily claim that it was intentional. I think I always for me personally, and I want to make it clear that I'm one part of so many people and contributors and a team of 4 editors who have brought this together. So I'm one small part of a really impressive crew of people who have brought this work to the world. To just with that disclaimer in mind, for me personally, um, I studied international security in grad school because I didn't know enough about it, and I very much came from a perspective of peace building and curiosity about what it, curiosity and belief that the there is inherent goodness in all of us, and that the peace is possible, and I also knew that the power structures around, security infrastructure and military and the way the world considers security were something that I didn't fully understand. And so when it was time for me to go to grad school, um, I thought it would be good for me to learn that that's something I didn't know about. And so that I could couple that with what I felt like I was learning. It turned out when you go to grad school, a lot of people keep learning about something they already knew about. So I didn't exactly realize what I was doing to myself. But when I think what that did for me was bring me into a space from a completely different perspective. And I really found myself aligning with the idea that security is much broader than what is commonly a fairly narrow and really important piece of security, which is, protection of borders and protection of, international sovereignty and military's thought and practice and strategy. And for me, I've just always thought of security in a much more expansive manner, which is aligned with kind of the human security philosophy. So that's the way that I envision security now. And I think that took me into what really was just, a really great job opportunity with the Stanley Center, where I could continue to expand and understand how I personally think about security, but also like what security is now to people who are who are living in a way that doesn't feel safe or secure. And so the work that I was doing at the time was really focused on the responsibility to protect, which is a global norm around, the countries of the world and their responsibility to both prevent mass atrocities at home, to what's collectively to prevent atrocities abroad, and to react when there are atrocities occurring, and people who don't have the ability to access safety and security need assistance from outside. So we were really focused on that, and what I learned through that work was that in so many mass atrocities, identity really is at the core of it. And that's because to commit violence on that large of a scale, in most cases, it requires dehumanizing a certain group of people or certain groups of people. And so that background in thinking about the role of identity in these mass scale conflicts, coupled with work that we were starting to explore with experts in urban violence reduction. And we started having conversations with them. Well, what are you working on in terms of prevention of, mass or chronic violence at the urban level? And when we had those conversations, we realized we were really having a very similar conversation when it came to solutions. And it was oriented around equality, justice, equal access, equal opportunities to live a safe, secure life with a good job, free from fear or reduced fear about whether your kids can get to school safely. And so that's really where that crux of this idea came together. And we said, it needs to start thinking about identity at not just the international relations level, but also the way that identity shows up in communities, and how those with power use or abuse their perceptions of identity to either include or exclude people from that, those equal opportunities and the inherent right that we believe that everybody has to security and safety.
Now, you bring in some really key points here. One of the things that kept popping up into my mind is I kept putting identity equals humanity. It kept coming in my mind as a photo, right? And sorry, I think in pictures. So, and so I kept seeing the word identity equals humanity, humanity equals identity. And so this is definitely across the board, because there's like a numerous conflicts in, I would say, pretty much every region except for maybe Antarctica, or maybe there's something there we don't know.
Yeah.
And the thing that is on the table, and I guess it's there's always been, I guess, wars almost since the beginning of time, or the time that we know, right? But the wars now are different because they are, you're fighting about resources like, food and land, but it's much different now. It's about, I guess, ways of thinking and erasing the individuality of, certain groups of people. Like, I see it, especially here being in the U.S., like everybody, you can even just see it and how people react. But here, I'll take a simple one, like the cell phone, right? Like, I'm not one of them, but I'm an Android user, but that's unusual. Everybody else is on the iPhone, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody is trying to be the same thing, the same person, and or at least that's where it was going. And then there was I don't know if I will say a wake up or a crack. The people said, wait just a moment here, right? Like, it's gone too far. Like, you're trying to push everybody into the same mold, but I can't necessarily fit into that same mold because it doesn't work. it doesn't work. And that is what we're facing right now in the U.S. and also globally, because that's the, I guess, the constant push is that everybody was trying to be fit into this mold. I'm using kind of as I'm like thinking like Jello molds, right? Like you must be this, but then let's say you had too many quote unquote, I'll just say apples to fit into the mix, and no matter how you shape it, pull it, it's just not going to work. And I guess why, and I'm sure you've seen that in your work. I guess why are we so uncomfortable, I'll just say globally, that everything doesn't have to fit into a mold?
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, that is a really good question. I don't know that I have the answer. I mean, I have my perspective on it, but the way that we treat that question in the volume is really thinking about power and really thinking about so much of the violence that we see, if not all the violence that we see, is connected to power and either trying to get it or trying to maintain it. And identity is then used as a tool to achieve that goal. So, like you said, if we're all envisioned, the truth is nobody fits the mold. There is no real mold. Certainly, people want to oversimplify humans and say that there is, but that oversimplification is really just in the eyes of the perpetrator or of the one with the power, and that is their way of maintaining or achieving the means to their own, which is its powers. And so you think about it in a practical way. Take Flint, Michigan as an example. And there were people who needed clean water, but those with power wanted to, maintain their role in society. And in order to do so, it meant not seeing these people as worthy of access to clean water and not hearing their complaints as meaningful enough to do something. And therefore, many people died, many more people suffered. And there was a reason it was this group of people who fell into a perceived identity group by those of power. And that is an example of what is seen worldwide when it comes to the way you see violence play out and why. And I think maybe, maybe there's a human condition to protect oneself, but with great power comes responsibility. And so I don't know. That's what we would say is we need to look at power, and we need to look at ensuring that those with power are meeting their responsibility to be inclusive of everyone, despite the fact that nobody fits in the mold.
Yes, and as I'm picturing, like, there's so much, especially that we see on the media. There's so much anger, and so many people are feeling maybe there's a mixed feeling. I would sense there's a sense of feeling lost, but then there's a sense of a want for in some cases a payback. Some people are on that trajectory. And some people have just like tossed in the towel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there is a segment that I know have like run off to Bali.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, but I don't think any of those three examples is maybe the right way to deal with it. I guess, why are we I guess maybe I should even take it out even to another level. Yes, there's, of course, humanity, being human, but do we need to, because of now um, the the world is becoming so much more connected daily, do we need to have these identity groups? I guess, do we is it an imperative that I say that, I am an American, I am a Californian, I am a woman, I am, white, or I am a minority group? Do we need to have these things, or is it better maybe we throw out all those identities, or is there a danger in not even having those?
You know, I think it will always be. I think people inherently want to belong.
Mm-hmm.
And so finding shared identity with others is a really safe way to do that. And I don't know that that's inherently a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just human nature, right? We instinctually need comfort and safety among those that we know will understand us. For me, the challenge is when that becomes weaponized against them. So it's not necessarily having an identity, it's when someone having an identity different than yours becomes a problem, and then taken to the next level where maybe it's not just a problem, it's a threat. And then if it's not a threat, it's a disruption. These are the narratives that get used, and I think that's where the problem is. It's not necessary. We all have multiple identities at once,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the other challenge, is that when it comes to thinking about systemic mass violence that is rooted in identity, it's because those with the power to do so are oversimplifying where any individual belongs. That no one belongs to a single identity group. We're all way too complex and complicated for that. But they're abusing you and making it seem as though that's the case, and that is dehumanizing. So that's really the problem. I don't think it's a problem that you have these multiple identities. I think that's what makes the world beautiful, and it's okay to want to belong. It's just not okay to write people to dehumanize or to restrict access or safety for people based on, who I may, or who, a certain politician or a certain business group may view as not worthy of the same human, humanity as they are.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, and I did kind of the kind of devil's advocate look, because that is one of approach that is often brought up, is just like throw everything out and just you're you, I'm me, and who cares about the rest. But those identities, yes, they're what make us special, and what make us want to, I guess, travel to these interesting places, because we want to learn more about that culture, how they, live in that area, how they, develop their relationships, and hopefully, um, if if people can, I guess, open up their minds a bit, to what it really means to be, I guess, a human. And do you think that we have, do you feel that things have gotten better or worse from how they were, let's say, 20 years ago?
Oh, I think it depends.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's why looking at these dynamics through the city lens, or, at the city level, I think so interesting. Um, because in some places it's gotten so much better. Um, in other places it's gotten so much worse. And yeah, I think it really depends. I also think identity has always been used over time in history to justify violence into, whether explicitly or implicitly. If someone seems less human or less worthy, then it was easier to commit violence against them, right? So this is a deliberate tool um, to justify violence. But I think in the U.S. certainly the role that identity is playing in further polarizing, inciting political violence, turning communities against each other. It's certainly not been a positive trend. Um, those of us in the atrocity prevention field have been sounding that alarm for a long time. And also, Gallup just recently did a poll, and while globally conflict and violence are rising, we're at the highest point of individuals feeling safe that we ever have been. So these weird dynamics of people feeling more safe on an individual level and in a very practical, measurable level, there being more, interstate conflict, more domestic conflict than there has been in recent history. So it's a weird time to be alive, for sure.
That's an interesting statistic because, I guess people feel that they have more autonomy now, maybe because of technology, or and what I mean by that, not only like, obviously having access to a cell phone, but on that cell phone, they're watching, I'll just use an Instagram, like a Instagram influencer go from rags to riches. Do they feel then that they can, that can be me too? So I don't have to, I guess, stick to the script the society has given me, that now if I want to, go a different direction, that I have the ability to do that, and I have the ability to, I guess, develop my life the way that I want. Do you think that could be maybe a reason that people feel safer, or do you think it's something else?
I would need to dig into the report a little bit more. But I think it probably depends on where you're geographically located too. So I'm sure there are technological components to it. I would be completely hypothesizing if if I were to say anything for sure. But there are places where violence has significantly reduced. And actually, even within the United States, some of our biggest cities have seen tremendous violence reduction since the pandemic. So that's why the nuance of, the geographically, but there were real concerted efforts to actually make places and cities in particular safer in the US, and it worked. And there are success stories. I think it's so maybe a survey like this is doing a better job at getting, to the community level in ways that represent kind of an individual perspective and kind of day-to-day experience that isn't general, because I think that might be a bit different than the general interest also that you've mentioned is present. And that's in the US context. But also there are, Central and South America have historically had exceptionally high levels of violence. And for instance, in certain places, there have been real improvements. Some of them have been at the expense of human rights, which is a big problem. But there are places where people actually feel so much safer. And so it's just a weird, again, juxtaposition of some general trends that I think will likely over time threaten that perception of safety, but also real accomplishments. And And that's why it is important to hold on to the truths of things are not good, but also the truths of there are solutions that are working, and we need to be learning more about them and expanding them and implementing them in more places too, because the evidence is right there.
Do you have a certain story that you would like to share where you saw like a big turnaround from, I guess, either an area that felt unsafe or where you were seeing different groups that were experiencing some type of violence or atrocities, and that it was just I guess that you were just, you thought it was remarkable or it just wowed you from like where they started to where they are now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could tell one story that is included in this book, which is a story about a program that was implemented in Mexico City in a neighborhood that was known for a lot of re- um, retributive killings. And so, gang violence, and someone's family member or friend would be harmed, and then they would, you know, go back to get whoever it was. And so there was a program that was implemented there that is a common model for violence interruption called ceasefire. And it was implemented in strong partnership with the police, who actually worked to develop relationships, trust, rapport among the community in this neighborhood, um, and would, when there was an incident, would reach out, and this is an example that is done in many locations around the world, but they would go reach out, maybe go to the hospital or go to the family member and talk to them about cycles of violence and what the options are aside from just going out and committing another act of violence. And I'm not going to be able to give you the exact percentages of reduction in violence, and in particular in homicides in this Clateras neighborhood, but they were really, really noticeable. In the high percentage range of the, I don't know, I can't give you the number because I'll be wrong, and then you have to cut it anyways. But but they really actually built relationships with this community, and it goes two ways. It's both the community members learning to trust law enforcement, it can sometimes be a really hard obstacle to overcome, and also the law enforcement officers learning to see the community as a community of individuals with hearts and minds who can be engaged with as a fellow human, and instead of a problem group. And so that combination of building these relationships made this neighborhood safer. And one of the things that the officers said in their interview was, we used to see this neighborhood as just the violent neighborhood, and when we started looking at the data and the information, we realized it's really a very small group of people in this neighborhood that are committing the overwhelming majority of violence. And so once we figured that out, we could go engage with them, and we could see them as both who we need to work with, but also who is also creating insecurity for the rest of their neighbors and the rest of their community. And so I think it's just a really good example of taking the time and gaining perspective from all sides to remember what the goal is. And everybody there wanted to be safe. It's just the ways that the neighborhood was going about it wasn't actually increasing safety. So they used an evidence-based approach, and it worked, and the neighborhood is safer.
I like that because you went from having, I guess you would say, two broad brushstrokes. And what I mean by that is that the people in the neighborhood saw the police like, okay, these are the police that are, coming here to crack down, but aren't necessarily getting to the problem. And the police are maybe causing the problem. And that's how some of the people in the neighborhood probably thought. And then the police were thinking like, this neighborhood is problematic, a whole bunch of troublemakers. But then when they were presented with the details and it was drilled down, that they could then see that, okay, we've been looking at this the wrong way and we lost perspective because of, it's like I guess a classroom when they have one bad apple. It spoils the bunch in the class, but the whole class isn't bad. It's just this one bad apple. And, whoever this apple touches infects, essentially. Yep. And so they had lost that ability to have a perspective, but then once presented the data, then it let them become, I guess I'll just say, quote unquote, human again, and start looking at these neighborhoods as individual people who are not necessarily contributing to the problem. And then it allowed them to start thinking, okay, we can find our people who, want the same thing, the same ideals as us. And this is a perfect example of what needs to go on today across the board.
I completely agree with you.
And it's so easy because right there, even if we break it down into identities, right? So the police, they have the identity that, we're supposed to, tell the law, protect, the people who are having these horrible things happen to them. And, the buck stops here, having that kind of identity. And then, of course, they have their individuals. But sometimes that, especially when it comes to work, that identity makes you forget all the other ones that you carry as well. And so I will say just, I think it's just probably general, right? Because we're all running through our lives, that we just take the identity that we have to deal with the day in and day out, and then we forget to hone in and really look at each other as, you have things just like me. Yes, we have differences, but when it comes down to the core, we're all just trying to get to the same thing. We all just want to get through the day, work to be the best person that we can. If we have families, take care of them, or, all of us are some part of some kind of family, whether, together or not. So we want to, and then of course, eat, take care of ourselves, and, be overall fairly happy. I don't think there's anyone on the planet that isn't looking for that. And if we could just remember that, that would make it a lot easier. Like, we're just trying to all get through the day, essentially. And it's so sad, too. And I started thinking when you were talking about how, how there are areas that have, had significant, increase of, great things happening. But we might be, or I guess we're being led down this trail to just think it's all doom and gloom. And it's specifically disheartening after we were just all literally locked down for years. and really felt in that time when we were locked down, the need for each other. Like when you couldn't go out and see your friend for dinner, when you couldn't go, say hello to your best friend anymore, when you couldn't go see your newborn niece. And we had such a craving for humanity. And then now, quote unquote, the proverbial doors have opened again, that we can go say to your friend and see, let's have dinner and see your family again. We now want to shut the doors down, because somebody has told us that, they aren't on the same team. And it's amazing that it's like a light switch could go off that soon after we experience such trauma. But, I guess not to get into the psychology of it, I don't know if that's like from that we're all like suffering the after effects of a trauma and just don't know how to process the emotions. And so it's just coming out like in all different directions.
Mhm. I think I don't know either, and I shouldn't get any credit or be trusted on anything related to psychology, but I do know that that is true, and also there's intention behind that. And sometimes I think it's really convenient for people with power when we take all the responsibility of the problems. But like you said, there are people with power and influence who are reinforcing that polarization and that distrust and the dehumanization between groups. And the media does get more attention when it's the negative versus the positive. And so it's really important that as individuals, we take that moment, take that breath or take that step back to gain perspective, and also hold those to account who are working against that human tendency to connect.
Yes. Yes. And now to take the conversation to a higher level and to look at it from a global perspective, because of all of these, local and I'll say country conflicts, and all the things that are going on, it's making us miss one of the important things that we need to really start considering in the next decade here as I would say, planet. um, so all these identity conflicts and sort of like, this is mine, this is yours, is leading us to forget that we also need to take care of just our daily living in our planet. Our planet is in grave trouble. And what I mean by that, we're having troubles in, I guess the easiest one is we see for the climate, which then is affecting us for our food. It's affecting where we live. That's another thing that's causing people to have displacement, right? So, maybe we're in one region, but now you have to leave because now this region floods all the time. You no longer can, grow food here. And so the people that are in another region are experiencing an influx of people coming, and then they have to adjust to these new people. And I guess you would say it's an exchange of identities and a loss of identities, and it's all being caused by inner conflicts and its effects. And so how would you say that the broader problem now of climate change is being affected by identities? And I know this is a big question. This is also, I'll say this is the beauty pageant question. And, how do all these identities, it's like a ping pong ball. Like they're causing effects on the planet at a monumental scale, right? If we look at the SDG 2030 goals that we're supposed to achieve in 5 years, which doesn't look like we're going to make it there, I guess what can we do, or how do we what do we have to do to save ourselves, I guess? I'll just put it there. How do we save ourselves because of these identity conflicts? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge question, I know.
It is a huge question. I mean, I think it's funny though, because the this big question really feels like, I'm going to oversimplify this, but if policymakers and businesses and communities aren't thinking about how these groups of people with their different identities are going to see in their community and what that means, if they aren't considering identity and considering that there are productive ways to manage these conditions and that there are unproductive and dangerous ways to manage these conditions, then there won't be the appropriate solutions. So people moving in and out of urban areas is not a new phenomenon. However, we have more people living in urban areas than ever before. The world is rapidly urbanizing, and it's because of all of these changes that you've said: internal conflicts, climate change, need for job, economy, all of these issues. And so it needs to be a policy consideration what the role of identity means. And those what I think the content in this book would suggest is that the policy decisions need to take into account the structural conditions that make access to basic human needs equitable for everyone. And that's a simple idea, but it's certainly complicated. And it can be done because humans are actually quite exceptional at breaking down boundaries and barriers and coming up with solutions. But we need the right people with the power to influence those discussions and those policies to be in place.
Yes, I like your answer. It's simple, straight to the point, and I guess in some ways obvious. And it's just the thing that I don't know. We just can't seem to do the straight thing. I don't know why. I've never been able to figure that out. Yeah. But I know it has things to do with power and all of that. But just to do the straight thing, it would be interesting if we just did the straight thing to see, just for once, how it works. I would just love to see it. And we might be even more amazed than we could ever imagine.
I think you're right. A lot of that comes down to listening, and the listening is really part of that. And communities are actually exceptional at working together and knowing what they need, and so listening to them and understanding and holding, respecting what is being said, what is being heard, what is being experienced, and really thinking with communities about how to meet this moment is really essential. And I think, again, it kind of comes back full circle to how we started off, that people are living peacefully together all over us, all around us. And we can look at that and we can use that as a beacon of hope for the possibility to do the right thing. We just have to be mindful about how we're getting there. But it's not as complicated as it seems, as some people want to make it sound.
Mm-hmm. And that's nice to know. And my final question, because we find ourselves with the younger generation that is just, I would say, probably getting into college or coming out of college. A lot of them are a little bit scared and feeling, hopeless a little bit about the world because they've been paying attention to the news. They've experienced being locked down and didn't get to go to their own high school graduations and proms and all of those kind of things. And so, I would say they're probably a little bit of shaken up. So what would you say to the younger generation about both, I guess, appreciating their own identities, but how to, I guess, look forward to the future, like since they're going to be the next people leading us, what would you say to them?
I would say there's a reason to be hopeful. And it's also totally understandable how they're feeling. And the only way we're going to get through this is together. I think like that would be like my core message, that, like, it's very valid how they're experiencing the world right now. And there's a lot of reasons for us to be optimistic and to we have to find some balance in holding the real desperate challenges that we're facing, while also understanding that humans have overcome horrible things before, and you will again. And we can learn from that, and we can continue to make progress. I mean, there's always a tendency to want to go back to something that felt more comfortable, but the truth is there was a lot that needed to be fixed, even when things felt more comfortable for some people. So I think it's also possible to reframe this moment as an opportunity, and you have to be careful with that, because it is scary to come out of a college and not have a job. But also our youth are so incredible and innovative and creative. And so it's going to take a lot of teamwork and collaboration for us to move out of this moment. But I have a lot of faith that we will. And that, those of us with old frameworks in mind, who are carrying our own conditioning, also need to let up a little bit and allow some new frameworks to enter, and new ways of being with one another enter, and challenge some of the norms that worked okay. It didn't work well enough. So we're just gonna have to hunker down and do it together.
Yes, we're on this ball together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jai-Ayla, for your time and insight. To learn more, go to stanleycenter.org. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.work to start your project of change today. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.work/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good. We're focused on what matters.